We want to go ahead and open up this space to doing whatever is most comfortable for you. So if you need a stretch, have a snack, care for your children, your pets, or your elders, do whatever feels most comfortable. Also, you're welcome to ask questions throughout the presentation via the chat, and we'll have ample time at the end for Q&A.
All right, thanks, Tasha. So
We'd
first,
like to do a little housekeeping first, if that's okay.
Oh yes, I totally forgot. Thank you.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Do you want to talk about the crisis counseling arrangements?
So yeah, I'll let Diana make the housekeeping.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. I'm Diana Cottrell, and I'm the virtual producer for today's event. So I just wanted to let you know a few housekeeping items. I will be taking attendance for today's session, so you can get credit for attending. So if the name that's showing on your screen is something different than the name you registered, if you could please update your name. If you're not sure how to do that or don't feel comfortable doing that, you could also send me a direct message in the chat folder to Diana Cottrell so I can get your name and give you credit for your attendance today. Like Tasha was sharing, any questions you have, if you could put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we address those at the end of the session today. We're also going to be we'll also be recording the training, so I wanted to let you know that the session is recorded. If you hear anything during the session that triggers you or you feel the need to speak with someone, please send a direct message to Angela Acosta, who is the host of today's session, Angie Acosta, and what she can do is put you in touch with someone that can speak with you right away. So if you have any questions, just let us know. I'll be watching the chat box throughout.
Thank you. Sorry, Kat.
No, perfectly good information. Thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and we just want to get to know everyone who's present a little bit as individuals, beyond lunch foods before we start. So if you guys could please put your name, pronouns, and a fun fact about yourself in the chat, I'd appreciate it. For example, my name is Kat. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them interchangeably, and I have a rock collection that I am very proud of. So I would like to pass it off to Tasha.
So I'm Tasha. My pronouns are she, her, and my fun fact is that I've visited 27 different states.
I didn't know that about Tasha. Thank you for sharing. Cool.
Searching for something you didn't know, so I could surprise you.
Thank you. Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's see. Let's look at what people are putting in the chat. Okay, Diana, she, her, over 50 first cousins. That's impressive. All right. Caitlin, she, her, hers. A triplet, also very interesting. Wow, rare. Okay, Cheryl. Abby loves comic books, me too. Okay. Sarah, third generation to be adopted in the family. Okay, Nicole traveled to 11 different countries. Wow, Kendra, Japanese was her first language. Okay, Suzanne likes to hike, me too. Awesome. 3 raised beds from Lindsay, that's awesome. Okay, I like to paint too, Sydney. Okay, thank you guys for this. These are great, wow.
Yeah, you guys have some impressive skills.
Used to moonlight as a musician, fluent 4 languages. All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys. Wow. Okay, yeah, you guys are very talented. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that with us. We're really grateful you're here, and we are excited to get started. And first, we just want to give you a little background, like who we are and our organization, very briefly. So, yeah.
So, Kat and I are survivor community specialists here at the Virginia Anti-Violence Project. And what that means is that we help survivors find the services and resources that they may need. Some of the things that qualify me to give this training on LGBTQ plus survivors of violence is that I'm a bisexual person who's a survivor of domestic violence.
Yeah, as Tasha said, I am also a survivor community specialist, and I identify as non-binary, pansexual, and I am also a survivor of sexual violence. So you guys are probably wondering what VAVP is at this point, and Tasha will give you a brief rundown.
So the Virginia Anti-Violence Project, or VAVP, works to address and end violence within and against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities across Virginia. We believe that in order to end oppression against LGBTQ plus communities, we must also work against other oppressions, including but not limited to racism, classism, sexism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, ableism, and ageism. We provide direct support, advocacy, referrals, and information to lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer and questioning identified individuals that have been impacted by violence. We also provide training to increase prevention, awareness, education, and successful responses to intimate partner violence, sexual violence, hate violence, state-sanctioned violence, stalking, bullying, and harassment, along with emphasizing the skills for healthy relationships and sexuality.
Thanks, Tasha. So first, we would like to gauge how you guys are feeling on this topic. So how comfortable are you in responding to LGBTQ plus survivors of sexual violence? So in this part, we'd like you to use the annotate function to do a stamp of your choice along the graph. The red smiley will represent not at all comfortable, and the blue will be very comfortable. So I'm going to explain, don't worry, I'm going to explain the annotate feature very quickly. So if you're on a desktop, the annotate function is at the top of your screen under view options. After clicking view options, click annotate, then click stamp and use a stamp of your choice in the area that best represents your comfortability. So if the annotation feature isn't working for you and you're comfortable with sending your answer in the chat, you're welcome to put something in. I see a few people got it. Awesome. I'm going to explain the annotation feature one more time because I know it can be a little confusing. So at the top of your screen, click view options. After clicking that, click annotate, then click stamp and use a stamp of your choice in whatever area you're feeling. Okay. I'm going to give you guys just a few seconds.
Hey, good morning. If we're on mobile, is there an annotate function on mobile?
Ooh, I believe so.
I have my military computer, so I'm like, I didn't trust it to actually get Zoom going.
Yeah, I apologize. Next time I do this, I will make sure to research that. I don't know how at this moment.
I'm actually online from my PC, but like not the Zoom app, but on browser, and I think I don't get the option for it either.
Okay. All right. If you guys are comfortable, you can put something in the chat, but if not, that's okay. We have, the cool thing is, I mean, after we're done with this poll, we have a little something in this presentation for everyone. So you'll be good. All right. I think, all right, cool. Okay. So we have a good mix. And like I said, we'll be going over terminology, best practices, and a lot of stuff today. So yeah, there's a little for everyone. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep going, but we're keeping this in mind, like where you guys are here. Oh, let me go ahead and.
I was wondering, would you, if we wanted to, would you be able to send the recordings out to us?
Yeah, so I just answered you in the chat. The recording will be sent after the training.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's see, I'll pass it off to Tasha.
So this is an overview of what we'll be covering today. So we just had our introductions. Next, we're going to go over terminology, like what LGBTQIA means, as well as other relevant terms. We're going to follow that up with a segment with a short activity on Jamboard, And then we're going to watch a video via YouTube and have a discussion in breakout rooms where we'll speak on barriers and myths. And then we're going to take a short break. And then finally, we'll talk about best practices and close out, as well as answer any last questions that you may have. So without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you, Tasha. All right. So as we mentioned earlier, here at the AVP, we believe that in order to end oppression against LGBTQ plus communities, we must also work to end all other oppressions. So someone's experience of sexual violence and ability to access services is impacted by all of their identities. They're not fragmented into separate parts of them, but exist in one ever blended context as a whole person. So intersectionality is a term coined by professor, lawyer, civil rights advocate, philosopher, and leading scholar of critical race theory, Kimberly Crenshaw, to describe the interconnected nature of social categories as they apply to individuals and groups of people. So as you participate in activities today and absorb new information, we'd like for all of us to hold what is known as like an intersectional framework or perspective. Personally, I'm a very visual learner, so I thought it would be nice to have us watch a short little supplemental video on the more individual aspect of this concept, illustrated by Stephanie Najma Johnson. This video was created with the deaf community in mind, so there is no sound. However, the video with closed captioning will be sent out after the presentation today, and we're going to post the link to the transcript right now in the chat with image descriptions. So if you're impaired via sight, you can still get the same experience. Okay, so I will go ahead and bear with me. Technology is not my strong suit, but I think this will work. Let me know if you guys are having problems seeing. Oh, okay. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that, got something from that. Thanks for being with us for that. Okay. So we're going ahead and move on and just do a quick, well, a little bit quick overview of some terminology. So I'll hand it off to Tasha.
Yeah, I really appreciate that video for the focus on intersectionality. And I would like to say that LGBTQ plus people are not a monolith. We are intersectional, and I can't state that enough. People within the community come from vastly different backgrounds and oftentimes can disagree on certain definitions. As individuals, we are bound to change our way of thinking over time. Here at VAVP, we are committed to always learning. If anyone has any suggestions for us after the presentation, please feel free to add that to the evaluation or reach out to us at the emails provided at the end. Although we would love to, we just don't have time today to talk about all the diverse identities in the community. LGBTQ or LGBTQIA are short acronyms for a vast array of experiences. So please keep in mind that this list is not exhaustive. Part of your personal work is learning more about different ways that LGBTQ people exist in the world. Also, please keep in mind that LGBTQ or LGBTQIA acronym includes sexualities, genders, and other identities. It's important to be aware of these differences and especially know that people's gender identity is not a predictor of their sexuality and vice versa.
Thank you, Tasha. All right, so we're gonna do a quick little overview and let's get started just with like a couple basics. So in our society, gender itself is often understood in terms of cultural gender roles. Gender identity is an individual person's sense of one's own gender or lack thereof. So we often think of this as an internal feeling of being a woman, a man, neither, both, or other genders. For example, Tasha identifies as a woman and I identify as non-binary. So sexual orientation, on the other hand, is a culturally defined set of meanings through which people describe their identity, usually in relation to the gender or genders to which they are attracted. Sexual orientation is not static and can shift over time. So many people also consider romantic or affectional attraction an aspect of their sexuality, but this is not always the case, as there are also romantic orientations. When we talk about sexuality today, we are including both people who choose these identities in relation to sexual and romantic attraction and those who choose them solely based on sexual attraction. So let's keep it rolling.
So moving right along, let's talk about sex assigned at birth. Sex assigned at birth, sometimes called sex, is a medically and socially constructed determination of a person's label of female or male. This is almost always based on a doctor's visual assessment of a baby's external anatomy and genitalia. The difference between sex assigned at birth and gender is important to keep in mind, although children are often simultaneously assigned gender and sex at birth. Gender expression, also just called expression, is how a person presents their gender identity to others. And this is typically done through clothing, appearance, voice, and behavior associated with specific sociocultural contexts. What's important to understand is that expression doesn't always align with the perceived cultural expectations of a gender that a person identifies with. For example, I know people who identify as men who regularly wear dresses and makeup. Gender shifts over time, place, culture, and more. We should be prepared to meet people who do not conform to our expectations of how certain genders should look and behave. So another word that you may have heard before is transitioning. This is the time when a person begins living as a gender with which they identify rather than the gender they were assigned at birth. This may include changing one's first name and dressing or grooming differently, but keep in mind with what we talked about with expression. Expression looks different for everyone. Someone may transition and change nothing but their identity. Another thing to note is that we should avoid using terms like passing, preoperative, or sex change. Transitioning is a term that is most often used and the most accepted by the community. And it's inclusive of people who are transitioning in whatever way is best for them.
Thank you. All right, so let's talk a little bit more on sex assignment. So intersex is an umbrella term used to describe a wide range of natural body variations that do not fit neatly into conventional medical definitions of male or female. So if you've ever seen the acronym LGBTQIA+, the I stands for intersex. And intersex people are one of the many reasons why we define sex assigned at birth as constructed. So many visibly intersex people are mutilated in infancy and early childhood by doctors to make the individual sex characteristics conform to society's idea of what normal bodies should look like. Intersex people are actually relatively common, although society's denial of their existence has really allowed little room for intersex issues to be discussed publicly. Up to 1.7% of the population is born with intersex traits, and that's around the same as the percentage of redheaded people or people with green eyes. Some other vocabulary that we should just be aware of when talking about sex assigned at birth is assigned female at birth, for which the acronym is AFAB, pronounced AFAB usually, and assigned male at birth, for which the acronym is AMAB, which is usually pronounced AMAB. For example, when I was born, the doctor labeled me as female, so I was assigned female at birth. The gender I identify with, however, is non-binary, so I'm both AFAB and non-binary. It's just one of them is sex assigned at birth and one of them is gender. So yeah, pass it off to Tasha.
Yeah, so let's move on and talk about sexuality. A lesbian person is usually a person whose primary sexual and/or romantic orientation is towards people of the same gender. And then a gay person is usually a man whose primary sexual and/or romantic orientation is towards people of the same gender. Gay can sometimes be used as a blanket term for people who do not identify as straight or heterosexual. However, we recommend that providers do not use this as a blanket term, as some people in the community do not prefer to use it in that way. Next up is bisexual. That's a term for people who experience sexual and/or romantic attraction to people of one's own gender identity and other gender identities. One thing we also want to address is that some non-binary and/or gender non-conforming people also identify exclusively as lesbians or gay. For example, a non-binary person who also identifies as a lesbian may have some connection to womanhood and be primarily attracted to women, and thus feel that that identity fits them best. We should be prepared to encounter people whose identities do not necessarily coincide with our preconceptions.
Okay. All right, so moving right along, asexual is a name for a broad spectrum of sexual orientations, generally characterized by feeling varying degrees of sexual attraction or desire for partnered sexuality. Again, if you have seen the acronym LGBTQIA+, the A stands for asexuality. Asexuality is distinct from celibacy, which is the deliberate abstention from sexual activity despite sexual desire, but some asexual people do have sex and experience varying levels of sexual attraction. For example, some asexual people that I have met experience romantic attraction and just desire sex very infrequently. So overall, there are many diverse ways of being asexual. The next one we have up here is pansexual. That's used to describe people who have romantic, sexual, or affectional desire for people of all genders and regardless of gender. So this has some overlap with bisexuality, and different people have different reasons for choosing one label over another. Something else you might hear is bi plus. This is used as an umbrella term to describe, to include bisexual, pansexual, and other identities that include attraction to multiple genders. And I see that most often with research and organizing, just to describe that shared experience. Okay, pass it on to Tosh.
So let's move on to gender. Transgender is a term for people whose gender identity and/or expression is different from those cultural expectations typically associated with their sex assigned at birth. It is sometimes used as a blanket term for people who do not identify as cisgender. Something to note is that when we speak about binary transgender people, we shouldn't use phrases or terms like born a woman, man, or even a man born in a woman's body, or similar phrases. This is where it's appropriate to use assigned female or assigned male at birth. However, always ask yourself if what you are asking or saying is even necessary. Question whether you would ask a similar question to or speak similarly about a cisgender client. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about what cisgender means. Cisgender is a term for someone who exclusively identifies with the gender traditionally associated with their sex assigned at birth. Being cisgender is not inherently part of the LGBTQ+ community on its own. For example, I was assigned female at birth and I identify both as a woman and a bisexual. I am cisgender, yet I am still part of the LGBTQ+ community because I'm bisexual. On the other hand, a woman who is assigned female at birth and identifies as straight or heterosexual is likely not a part of the community. Remember, it's always best to mirror the language of who you're talking to. Some people who are not cisgender may choose not to use the term transgender for whatever reason. People who are not cisgender and identify along the binary of man or woman may refer to themselves as a transgender man or a transgender woman, or simply a man or woman. Do your best to mirror their language when possible and appropriate.
Right. So now we're going to talk just a little bit more about gender. So you may have heard the term non-binary before today. This is an umbrella term used to describe people who feel that their gender cannot be defined within the margins of the gender binary of man and woman. You may also hear the term gender nonconforming, or GNC for short. This usually refers to someone's expression rather than their identity. Like Bi+, I most often hear this in organizing, research, and advocacy services as a way to talk about a larger group of shared experiences, but it can also be used as an identity. Next is two-spirit. This is an umbrella term that is used to describe a variety of Native or Indigenous sexual and gender identities. There are also 3 other identities under the non-binary or GNC umbrella that are not listed here that I just want to mention quickly, including agender, genderqueer, and gender fluid. So agender refers to someone who does not identify themselves as having a gender. Genderqueer is a umbrella term built around the word queer, referring to people who transgress mainstream distinctions of gender. And gender fluid describes people who do not identify as having a fixed gender. So many people who identify as non-binary, gender nonconforming, or another gender identity outside of the binary may also identify as transgender. Some do not. People have different reasons for using certain terms. And as always, it's best to mirror the language of whom you're speaking to and to not assume how they identify themselves.
Yeah, so last but not least, let's talk about the word queer. This is commonly used to convey both an identity and a sense of community outside of heteronormativity and the gender binary. This is often used in a way that transcends the boundaries of both sexual orientation and gender identity. Something important to remember, though, is that queer has been used as a slur in recent history. We must be aware of intersectionality here, as many older people in the community do not identify as queer and associate this word instead with traumatic experiences. I know we've said this many times already, but again, please mirror the language of someone you're talking to. With the word queer specifically, if you're not in the community, it's wise to check with a person who is already self-identified with queer as to whether they're okay with you using it, or if they would prefer you use another term. Someone may use it for themselves, and within LGBTQ+ spaces, but still be uncomfortable with people outside of the community using it.
Exactly. All right. Thank you. All right. So we want to take a moment to just utilize a little bit of what we've learned. So Tasha is going to send a link in the chat to Jamboard, and we're going to share a couple of our identities. So when you enter Jamboard, it should give you a name such as Anonymous Leopard. But if you still don't feel comfortable participating for whatever reason, that's perfectly fine. If you do choose to participate, you can use the sticky note function on the left-hand side, and then just go ahead and write in one or multiple identities. And from this activity, you get the idea that, you know, the terminology we discussed doesn't just apply to the LGBTQ plus community. Lots of people benefit from ways to describe their identity, and these terms do intersect in the context of a whole person. So we've left some examples on the Jamboard and on screen of what someone's identities may look like. So feel free to include whatever is important to you in whatever order you choose, whether it be your gender, status as a parent, ethnicity, age group, race, class background, culture, religion, sexuality, sex assigned at birth, whatever, and more. So yeah, so we're just going to give you guys a few minutes to write in some responses on the Jamboard. And yeah, just take a look at some of the responses. I might play a little music if I can, you know, bear with me. My technology skills are not the best, but I'll try. All right, so we just want to take a look and see. Thank you guys for participating in this. I'm excited by all the responses. Let's see. Okay, so we have Latinx, gay, man, Black, assigned female at birth, or AFAB, cisgender, straight, white, bisexual, queer, cisgender, disabled woman. Yeah, I love that you guys are like including not just sex assigned at birth and sexuality. There's like other identities too happening here, but we're good. Awesome. All right. Okay, multicultural. Thank you. Thank you guys for participating in that. Okay, let's see.
I just want to take a moment to answer. There was a question in the chat I'm trying to pull it up now.
Okay.
And I think someone already answered, but I just do want to just take a moment to read it just in case anyone. From Alyssa, I don't understand. Could someone explain what harm there is saying born a woman, aka female assigned at birth? Aren't these the same phrases and don't they mean the same things? And so I do think some people responded. Kat, do you see that? Trying to go down.
Yeah, I think these responses are really good. I would probably say that, woman is generally perceived as a gender identity, whereas assigned female at birth is like a sex. So one of them refers to like medical construction, and the other one is like more relating to like how you see yourself, identity, and gender roles. So when we say someone like was born a woman, that, I mean, as people said, that might feel invalidating for various reasons. I don't know, Tasha, you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, I think these answers hit it exactly. And as Kat was saying, the gender identity is a really big part of that. And so people express differently. And so acknowledging that gives it validity in saying assigned sex at birth versus this is what your gender identity is.
Okay, yeah. All right. Well, thank you for the question, though. That was, I'm glad that you brought that up so we could talk about it.
Yeah, good, great question.
On that note, let's see. All right. Do we want to go ahead and continue? Let's see.
Yeah, we can. I'm just looking over all of these sticky notes.
You
Great
can read some out if you want.
Yeah, bisexual, female, first generation, millennial, white, straight, father, veteran, cisgender, woman, gay. I'm trying to make some of these bigger. Gender non-conforming, no gender identity, more complex in any way I choose to label myself. That one, I feel that one.
That hits, that hits.
All right.
All right, let's see. Natasha, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Okay, so we want to start our next topic by watching a clip of a video that we feel really captures some of the barriers that LGBTQ+ people face when trying to access services after experiencing sexual violence. We will be discussing this in breakout rooms afterwards, so please take note on the barriers that the client Rain faced. So just one moment and we'll get started.
Yes, the moment is for me.
Ending sexual violence against women has become a national priority, and we are having incredible conversations in the media, in classrooms, in boardrooms, and at dinner tables around the United States that are creating a climate truly galvanized for change. But while the visibility surrounding the issue has increased, the violence itself has not ended. And what that tells me is we need to move beyond visibility and generate a solution that ends sexual violence for all people. What that demands is truly understanding the scope of the problem and appreciating who is at the greatest risk of experiencing sexual violence. In our country, we have a dominant narrative of who the sexual assault survivor is. And that narrative is impacted by the media, like the women of the Time's Up movement, Dateline, CNN, The Today Show, and of course by storylines on Law & Order SVU. These things, combined with our personal experiences and social ideas about violence and who can experience it, converge to create a rather singular idea of who the sexual assault survivor is. And I imagine that if we compared notes, we'd come up with a pretty similar image, that that person would definitely be female, likely white, probably under 40, typically thin, and always straight. And this narrative holds a surprising amount of power as it impacts our legislation, how we build programming, how we spend money, and our social sympathies towards survivors. Most simply, this narrative is of the white, female, straight survivor. And to be clear, this narrative isn't wrong. It's real and it's important, but it is incomplete. It is incomplete because it does not represent the experiences and stories of people at the greatest risk of experiencing sexual violence, the LGBTQ community. The data we have surrounding assault against LGBTQ people is alarming. We know that 44% of lesbians will be raped, experience physical violence, or stalking by the hands of an intimate partner, compared to 35% of straight women. We know that gay and bisexual men are both twice as likely as straight men to experience sexual harassment, and that 1 in 2 bisexual women will be raped in their life, and 1 in 2 people who identify as transgender will experience sexual violence. And I want to repeat those last 2 statistics because they are so important, that 1 in 2 bi women and 1 in 2 trans folks will experience sexual violence at least one time in their life. That is 50%. And that number is not just alarming, it is unacceptable. And because sexual orientation and gender identity do not live in silos, and we are complex beings with multiple identities, we necessarily have to take an intersectional lens to this issue. And when we do, we see that LGBTQ people of color are more likely to experience all forms of violence, including sexual violence, and that LGBTQ people who are unstably housed, have a disability, are imprisoned, or do sex work, are at an exponentially greater risk. Now, I have suggested that our cultural narrative is incomplete because it does not reflect those experiences and stories, but maybe I need to pause and take a step further back, because maybe the problem begins before this narrative is reinforced to the exclusion of the LGBTQ community. Maybe the problem begins before the narrative is written. Maybe it's written in a different language, a language that doesn't translate to the queer community, communities of color, or anyone who shares a marginalized identity. So bear with me. Have you ever traveled abroad or tried to communicate to somebody in a different language? It's just you and them alone in a room. There's no Google Translate or pen and paper. I think we can all remember those feelings of confusion and maybe irritation. But imagine it's an emergency, and it's only you and that other person alone in the room. You repeat what you need over and over as your voice grows louder and they look back at you with a blank stare. So you start to scramble to find a different way to communicate, but your heart beats faster, that tension rises, and you start choking on those feelings of confusion, anxiety, fear, desperation, and hopelessness. That is what a queer survivor of sexual violence faces when confronting systems, institutions, and people that do not speak their language. My work and my passion is serving queer survivors of sexual violence. By day, I run the Empower program, which is the first program in the nation designed specifically to meet the needs of LGBTQ survivors of sexual violence. The Empower program, its staff and patients truly give me life. By night, I'm a clinical psychologist with a private practice specializing in LGBT mental health and trauma. So over the course of my career, I've had the privilege of sharing in the healing journey of hundreds of queer survivors of sexual violence. And their stories are unique and complex and punctuated by resilience. But today I'm going to share just a small part of one person's story, a person I'm going to call Rain. Rain was a queer trans woman of color in her early 20s that moved to Chicago because Chicago offered this queer utopia, this opportunity to go by her pronouns, her chosen name, and be surrounded by people that not only validated her identities, but shared them. Rain came to see me about a year after moving, presenting with high levels of anxiety. In our work together, it became clear that she was experiencing significant violence in her intimate relationship. Rain's live-in partner would threaten to out her at work, repeatedly said hurtful and harmful things about her body, and again, over and over, told her that no one would ever love her because she was trans. All of this was a means to manipulate, force, and coerce Rain into sex that for her was never consensual. But Rain never called these experiences rape or sexual assault because they were normalized by friends who shared similar experiences and invalidated by her family that loved this partner and couldn't imagine them causing this much harm. So the work Rain and I did centered on consent, safety planning around the violence, and finding ways just to help her make it through the day. And we were making real progress. That was until Rain got a new job, that required her to take the train to work. She used to tell me that day after day on that train, people would say horrible transphobic things about her body or would touch her inappropriately. I remember her so clearly telling me, when I am on that train, my body doesn't belong to me, it belongs to them. And then Rain was raped at a party. She woke up not remembering exactly what happened, but knew something in her body did not feel right. So like the good survivor, she went to the hospital for a rape kit. And when she checked in, the receptionist was unable to gather her pronouns or chosen name in the medical record. And what that meant is when she was called back, when it was her turn, she was called by her dead name. Her dead name is the male name assigned at birth. The name that doesn't fit for who she is, the name that invalidates every core of her being, the name that causes her harm. But Rain swallowed that pain, mustered the courage, and went back to the exam room where she crawled on the table next to that scratchy gown. She looked down at her wrist to the medical ID bracelet that so boldly pronounced her dead name. Yet another reminder of her invisibility in a system designed to protect and support survivors. And then Rain overheard the nurse say, "We have a code R in exam room 3. He wants to do a rape kit, so we have to call the police. But before we do, does anyone know how to do a rape kit on him? You know, on someone like him?" And with that, Rain's anxiety mounted so high, she panicked and fled the emergency room without the care she not only needed, but deserved and was her right. Rain's friends and family did not speak her language when they didn't understand the sexual abuse in her relationship. The medical system literally did not speak her language when they were unable to capture her pronouns or chosen name in the electronic medical record. And the nurse certainly didn't speak her language when the nurse continued to misgender her and felt unprepared to do a trans-competent rape kit. Rain was pleading and begging for help from systems, institutions, and people that did not speak her language. They spoke the language of the white, straight, female survivor. I hope that Rain's story demonstrates that the language we have that dictates our programming and how we talk to and about survivors is not just incomplete and insufficient, but it causes harm. So in order to end sexual violence for all people, we need to learn Rain's language. Learning this language matters because sexual violence is expensive. It's expensive to
Okay, guys, thank you. All right, so now we want to process this video a little bit, and we'd like for you guys to do that together in breakout rooms of 4 to 5 for about 10 minutes. Yeah. So we would ask that each person, or at least one person from each group, report back either in the chat or by unmuting themselves after the discussion to give some answers from their group. So the questions, let me actually screen share one more time to get you the questions on, but they're going to be also broadcasted out. But the questions we'd like you to discuss are: 1, what barriers did Rain seek when faced when seeking services? And what are some ways that you can address barriers and unique needs of LGBTQ+ survivors at your own agency? So this message will be sent to each room. So don't feel like you need to memorize it or jot it down. And please take some time to introduce yourself to your group and include your pronouns. This could be the same introduction as the beginning, or you guys can come up with a little icebreaker on your own. So yeah. Okay. Thank you, Angie.
So I put you, Tasha and Diana in a room, but you can just stay in the main room. I totally forgot that was an option.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
So I put the questions in the chat box, but I will also broadcast them.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
No problem.
Thank you for the help.
No problem. So there are a couple people that haven't joined.
So they'll be coming back in 10 minutes, so probably 1:52.
I'm sorry, what time?
1:52. Would that, I think we started at 1. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, sorry, 2:02.
Okay, I was
I was like, yeah, doing a little Back to the Future or whatever moment. But
Okay,
yeah,
that works.
thank you. All right, I'm gonna step away from it.
I'm gonna broadcast the message one more time. The questions.
Do we want to send like a 2-minute?
If you are like know how to do that, that would be awesome.
Okay. So at 2:02, you said, right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Recording again and close all the rooms. And they will come back in about 56 seconds.
Okay. Is that everybody, or do we have a couple more?
Yes, that is everybody.
Okay, awesome. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you all got to know each other a little bit and had some good conversations. So we just want to open it up to if anyone wants to either unmute themselves or put something in the chat. Just let us know, like, what did your group talk about? Did you learn anything? Yeah.
I can go. We were room 4, and the main barrier that we identified was just how people within the LGBTQ plus community don't know which agencies are safe places, don't know where they can go for help that's safe. And to combat that, things that our agencies can do is education. Simply, like, that's the first thing, educating ourselves, educating the agency as a whole, and then also just accountability, holding ourselves accountable for any biases or anything that we need to work on, and then holding our coworkers and our agency accountable as well, and then making sure if you're going to advertise that your agency is a safe place, that it's actually a safe place all the way around.
Absolutely. And that kind of looks like what you were saying with training. It can't be a safe space, and you can't advertise a safe space if no one's engaged in LGBTQ plus training and in knowing how to respond to those clientele. Are there any other groups?
Yeah, if I can add on to what Rebecca said, and definitely agree about the education piece. And also we talked a little bit about like how you get that education in terms of doing your own work, bringing in experts and, paying them for their labor, and also recognizing that if we are, maybe sharing resources with folks or again, doing our own work, how are we making sure that that experiential work that is necessary is not at the cost of causing harm to someone who's asking for those services? So how are we making sure we're not using those folks as like, oh, you're my first trans client, this is such a cool experience for me kind of thing, and really showing up for them. And part of that is, again, doing our own work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin and Rebecca. Those are both really good. Really good points. Anybody else?
One thing that we talked about in our group is how important language is, and to make sure that it's in your forms and how you talk to somebody initially, you use all-inclusive language and don't make assumptions till, like both of you in the beginning have said, till somebody identifies themselves and describes their experience and then use their terminology.
Our group also talked about how some of the barriers were really systemic and some of the barriers were really interpersonal, and how you can work on both levels to mitigate them. So, for example, okay, the system, the technology says you can't put the patient's preferred name into your system, right? Well, then talk to the nurse and say, okay, you're going in with this patient. This is the name that they use. I know it's not the same as what's on their chart. So, like, finding those places to work on both a systems level and then on an interpersonal level, because the systems are so expansively oppressive. And so you need to work on different scales to address the needs of your clients.
Thank you, Maggie and Abby. Again, great points. I'm so excited right now. These are awesome.
I love that problem solving. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about what Maggie was sharing about using all-inclusive language, and going back to when Catherine and Tasha, you were introducing this session and saying, you know, it's one thing to say that you're an ally or you understand or you're tolerant, but you have to kind of take it a step further. So I was just sharing that, yes, you want to use that language, but instead of just kind of in the seat of comfort waiting for the person to give you the terminology, get to a place where you are challenging the anxieties and asking them directly, how would you like to be identified, or what name do you go by, or how, you know, having them give you that information, but taking the piece of discomfort from yourself and saying, hey, you know, educate me on how you want to be referred to as. And so I was just sharing, like at my school, we just in the last few months, and have been asking for this for a little bit, but changed our student record system so that when students go in, they can put their identities in the system, and they are telling us this, there needs to be a drop down for this, there needs to be an extension of this, and then going back and translating not just the stuff that's an electronic record, but then putting it onto paper, things like their transcripts and things that they're using to forward on to, you know, workplaces and further education. And again, taking the challenge of not just waiting for the education to come to you, but saying, hey, I have an ignorance here. Can you help me, you know, be educated on this? While also, like you said, noting that a lot of these things apply to the individual and not to, you know, to the whole group, and learning how to navigate that component. And then we noted with the example that was given about some of the barriers, like Abby said, about the interpersonal versus the systemic things, we were curious about, we know that Rain got some formalized counseling care, but what was going on in her realm that, and I'm assuming, and I said, because she's in Chicago, it's a bigger city and it's supposed to be a more inclusive city, what was going on where the knowledge was not, or the resources were not accessible about who and where to get access to these services, because she had experienced, you know, traumas before that, that rape leading to that hospital visit that did not get addressed via her family, her friends, or others that she was interacting with at work, et cetera.
You know, about changing systems and changing forms and changing just the very structure of what we do. Helen McDonald shared with me a resource, and they're on this call. Maybe Helen, you might have the title to share, because I don't remember what it was, but it was an excellent resource on how to take a good look at the way that your system's set up, the forms that you use, the language you use, and to do an inventory of and do some polishing up with your own internal systems, which I imagine also applies to stakeholder systems that you use. If I'm putting you on the spot, you don't have to do what I'm suggesting, but I just know, Helen, that you're on this call and that you'd actually know the title.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's actually a resource from LGBTQ, which is a dual domestic sexual violence agency in Boston that some folks might be familiar with here. I believe the resource I shared with you, Chris, was Open Doors, Open Minds, that has like a lot of great resources for assessments, internal assessments for agencies, really great resources for residential programs that are supporting LGBTQ survivors and clinical programs. So I'll drop it in the chat to the name.
Thanks, Helen. That was a printed resource, as I recall, and I'm not sure if it's available on electronically too.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Teresa. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys for being so candid and bringing up barriers. I really appreciate everything that was said, and I appreciate Teresa for taking the time to acknowledge that a lot of this work is personal. It's not enough to just go to a work training or to participate in a seminar or whatnot about LGBTQ or about marginalized populations or about populations that you may not understand. It's really important to take the personal time to research further, to identify the things that make you uncomfortable and to examine why that is. So let's go a little further into what we were talking about. We talked a lot about institutional and systemic barriers. These are larger scale issues. This list is just some of the ones that we have come across the most, and it's not exhaustive. First, one of the many things we hear is that LGBTQ+ survivors often feel that they have to train the professional. This is an added stressor when they are already experiencing trauma and have serious unmet needs that they are seeking support for. And it's why it's so important that all staff are trained to work with LGBTQ+ people. Next is the stigma or the risk of disclosure. Often, abusers will use someone's status as LGBTQ+ as a form of control. Many people are not out, and there are added risks to seeking help in these scenarios. They could lose familial, financial, or other support through being outed. That's why clients need to know that their information, including identities, is completely confidential. Many survivors also have a valid mistrust of systems. Unfortunately, re-victimization through law enforcement, medical providers, and advocates is not out of the norm. Many people seeking help have already experienced either ignorance or hostility in these spaces. There's also a very real and recent history of the criminalization and state-sanctioned destruction of LGBTQ+ people and spaces, especially targeting LGBTQ+ people of color. In addition, there are systemic inequities that create even more barriers to and for LGBTQ+ people, especially when they are at the intersection of different forms of oppression. Often, LGBTQ+ people are much less likely than others to have financial safety nets, and that means that they're much more likely to live in poverty. We are more likely to experience specific health disparities, and in many states, we are still not protected by law to ensure that we get equitable access to services that we need. These inequities increase dramatically along the lines of race, ability, and gender, with BIPOC, disabled people, women, and transgender people facing some of the largest disparities. For people with gender nonconforming or non-binary identities, they have to face a societal preference or for binary genders. This often presents as ignorance or overt hostility. LGBTQ+ survivors also meet another barrier when most advocacy and victim services are designed to serve straight cisgender women, as was talked about in the video. Many have not had training or developed infrastructure for serving LGBTQ+ people. This is where cissexism, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, and other forms of oppression against LGBTQ+ people in general come into play. To this day, many LGBTQ+ people, especially men and transgender women, are being turned away from advocacy services. In fact, 85% of victim advocates surveyed by the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs reported having worked with an LGBTQ+ survivor who was denied services because of their sexual orientation or because of their gender identity. So that makes even showing up to an agency require a massive amount of vulnerability. And even when transgender or non-binary people are not turned away, they are often re-traumatized by providers refusing to give specific services or use their pronouns and name, as we saw with Rain's story earlier.
Thank you, Tasha. I'm gonna restart screen share really quickly so that I can see you guys because I had it for video. All right, awesome. All right, well, we'll keep going then. Thank you again for the conversation earlier.
Would I be
So,
able to ask a question?
yeah, go ahead.
In the previous slide where it said 85% of advocates work with people, the LGBT. Earlier, Tasha, I heard you say that people within that community are being turned away by advocates. So I just I noticed a little bit of it yeah, I feel like I missed something. Like if some advocates are turning them away, and why does it say 85% of victim advocates report having worked with a survivor and was denied services? I mean, like,
So I think I can answer that question. Basically, this is referring like the people who were being surveyed talking about the survivors that they were working with. The survivor had gone to multiple agencies to seek help. So that's what, sorry, this is a little confusing, but that's what the statistic is coming from. It's like saying that this was probably the second, third, fourth person that this survivor had worked with to get help. But the people who were giving this data were not turning these people away. Does that answer your question?
the people of this something not the last part. I didn't quite understand it.
The sexual orientation or gender identity?
The last part of what you were saying.
Yeah, so the people who are giving the data to say 85% of the people we see, those people were not turning people away. It's that the survivor had seen people already who turned them away.
Okay. And, could you speak to why that is? Is it because of the advocates who turn them away, they don't really know how to deal with the community?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different reasons for different situations, but like at least one that I have heard of a lot is, for example, when we see like gay men who are survivors of sexual violence, a lot of times services are just like set up to serve straight women and will refuse to accommodate them, for example, in a shelter. So that would be an example of an LGBTQ plus survivor who was denied services. They would be denied access to a shelter because it was there was no shelter services for men available.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the questions. Awesome. All right. I will get into some normative beliefs, myths, and misconceptions then. So very quickly, let's see. All right. So first, I just want to talk about how abuse is downplayed both within and outside of the community. There's a false narrative that abuse is only perpetrated by men against women. And abuse between women is often considered to be less serious than that between men and women due to societal beliefs about women being incapable of abuse. On the other hand, as we touched on a minute ago, when male survivors come forward about abuse they have faced, they're often not treated with the same empathy or respect as female survivors or the same willingness to help. There are also often less support groups, shelters, and other services available to them whatsoever. And both of these issues have a root in misogyny. In addition, transgender women are often discriminated against, even within women's spaces, due to the belief that they're dangerous, not real women, or beliefs that other clients may not be accepting. These ideas are also fueled by transphobia and other stereotypes. Also, the hypersexualization of LGBTQ plus people often leads to a lack of understanding from providers. Bisexual people and others who are attracted to more than one gender face this issue even more so, as there's another false narrative that they're more willing to engage in sexual encounters than others. So when they come forward about sexual violence, they're often met with doubt or outright disbelief. Another myth that survivors often have to face is that LGBTQ plus people are easily identifiable through certain mannerisms or characteristics. This is just not true. And it's why we need to bring all of our training into each interaction with every client. And we need to talk, and we will talk a little bit more on how to do this in best practices. So that's it for the normative barriers and beliefs. And I think, do we have time? Let's see, for a little break. What do you think, Tasha? Let's see. I think maybe not. All right, let's see. Let's just keep going. I really appreciate the conversation we had earlier. It was a little longer than we had imagined. So please bear with us and we will just keep on rolling, keep on rolling. So Tasha, you go ahead.
So we just talked about best practices.
Oh, yeah. Just talk about barriers. And then, yes, we're going to talk about best practices. And we will be dividing these up in interpersonal, organization, individual, interpersonal, and organizational, which is what everyone was touching on earlier. Sorry, I interrupted you, Tasha. Go ahead.
Kat, did you want to do the individual slide?
Yes. Okay, just kidding. All right, guys. All right, so first on an individual level, we recommend that you assess your own values and beliefs regarding sexual orientation and gender identity. So is there anything you take for granted or things you need to do more research on? And as you do that, address your internal biases. Are there certain identities that you consider unconsciously or consciously more valid or understandable than others? Do you have a preference for working with cisgender and straight people? It's really our job to do that personal work beforehand so that we don't re-traumatize people coming to us for support in vulnerable times. And when you inevitably find yourself in places where you're lacking knowledge or you need to do more work, as we were talking about in our discussion earlier, educate yourself. It shouldn't fall on survivors or LGBTQ plus staff to train us in the places that we're lacking. And we just really want to avoid tokenizing people with that mentality. Still, it's important to acknowledge that this work is lifelong. Language and identity are not static, and things will continue to change in our lifetimes. So acknowledge what you don't know. And if you need supervision or guidance in a situation where there's just not the ability to get the knowledge that you need beforehand, ask for it. All right, your turn, Tasha.
That was it exactly. So these are some interpersonal tips. So start by universally asking for names and pronouns. Hi, how are you? What are your pronouns? What are your preferred pronouns? This becomes natural over time. And this kind of helps with that work of people or LGBTQ people feeling like they have to do the work themselves and have to advocate for themselves. And so if you do it, it sets the precedent. Make it a point to get these right. One of the many reasons transgender or gender nonconforming people are afraid to access services is the fear that they will have to experience from misgendering through incorrect pronouns or what is known as dead naming. We saw an example of that in the video. One of the best ways to open up conversations about pronouns is to start by sharing yours when you introduce yourself. Also, try to use inclusive language such as partner or parent or sibling when possible, especially when you don't have all of the information. This way, you avoid accidentally assuming the sexuality or gender of someone or the people around them. As we have said before, it's always best to mirror the language of the survivor. This doesn't just apply to the way that they describe incidents, but also about how they describe themselves and their identities. For example, if someone comes out and says that they are non-binary, don't just assume that they also identify as transgender or gender nonconforming. Simply mirror their language. Another extremely important practice is to confront discrimination and prejudice wherever you see it. So if we want to create and live in a world where LGBTQ plus people are safe and thriving, we cannot ignore small everyday actions that have ripple effects of harm. We understand that these conversations can be tough. One thing I found that helps me with these conversations is coming from a space of compassion and knowing that I too have made and will continue to make mistakes. Still, LGBTQ plus people shouldn't have to come from that place of educating others or putting themselves at risk when prejudice directly affects them. This is where allies have to step in. We are all bound to make mistakes. I know I do. What's important is that when we mess up or when we cause harm, you apologize and you move forward with changed behavior. Your apology doesn't have to be drawn out. And in fact, it's usually better for the individual you're speaking to, especially with things like pronouns, if you simply say sorry and then continue, but this time use the right pronouns. Ultimately, we are all going to mess up sometimes, and that's okay. Just make a commitment to yourself and to everyone else, either internally or out loud, to consistently do better in the future and actually do the work you need to do.
So now we're going to talk about some organizational best practices. So start by including actual and or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity in your organization's non-discrimination policy. This should read very similarly for both who you hire and who you serve. Also, this should not only be discussed with LGBTQ plus clients. All clients need to know your policies so that they understand that not only are they protected, but also that behavior targeting LGBTQ plus people will not be tolerated. These policies are actually required, at least as far as the non-discrimination policy for VAWA grantees. But if you aren't one, it's still a step in the right direction. And if you already have a non-discrimination policy or you're just thinking about it, it's still important to recognize that having an inclusive non-discrimination policy is not enough. If staff are serving people because of the policy, but haven't received training or don't have the knowledge to truly offer equitable services, then there's still harm being caused. Another thing to implement, again, another thing we touched on in our discussion, which I love, is implementing inclusive language on all agency forms. For example, all forms, including sex and gender, should allow clients to write in a response as well as have inclusive options. Documents should also use gender neutral language when talking about survivors and the people in their lives. You can do this by using they them pronouns and continuing to use the gender neutral language that we discussed in the interpersonal best practices. In that same vein, if you have restrooms at your agency, let these be all gender or gender inclusive restrooms. If you work in a building with other companies, you can still propose these changes to the building or talk with other companies about your ideas. We should also strive to provide LGBTQ plus specific resources and supplies. Representation and images on promotional pamphlets or flyers should be diverse in race, gender, and relationships. It's always nice also to see some bright and visible signs that express allyship with the community. In addition, if you offer supplies such as condoms, dental dams, menstrual products, or clothing, let clients select what they need rather than assuming what they would want. The next one is remember to treat someone's LGBTQ plus identity as confidential. You don't know if clients are out or who they're out to. Sometimes they may even bring someone with them as support who they're not out to. So it's best to treat someone's identity the same way you would confidential legal or medical information. You should also provide anti-homophobia training and anti-transphobia training for all staff and volunteers. And this should occur regularly to account for new hires and volunteers, as well as new information as trainers update their work and our language changes. This is important because even if every single person at your staff is trained to save for like one volunteer at an outreach event, and they say or ask something inappropriate to a potential client, not only will this person most likely, still be in the situation they're in, not seek help from your agency, they'll also tell other people not to. The community is small and tight knit, and incidents like that don't stop at the one person. They tend to ripple out. On that same note, screen your referrals to make sure that they're LGBTQ plus inclusive and accessible before you send survivors their way. If you find that your only option is to offer gender or sex segregated referrals, let your client self-select where they would like to be placed if possible. Last but not least, connect with your local LGBTQ+ community. If there is an LGBTQ+ resource center near you, ask them if they would like to partner with your organization and what they think that your agency needs to serve the community better. Listen and learn from the people you're serving as well so that you can do better each time. One example of an amazing organization that you can reach out to is VAVP. We are statewide, so we do trainings, prevention, advocacy, and lots of other work across Virginia with the home base in Richmond. All right, so let's see.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Kat, for that shameless plug.
Yes, of course. And would you down to do this final discussion, Tasha?
Yeah, so to wrap up, we were just wondering if you could name one thing you learned today or one thing you plan to change as a result of this training so that we can all leave this space looking forward to new possibilities. Please let us know in the chat of this section, or feel free to turn on your mic and share with us. Or if you're uncomfortable sharing, just make a note for yourself.
Something that I've learned was, or I guess not just learned because it's definitely discussed in my field of work often, but when the video, the TED Talk gave the statistics for just how often the sexual assault is happening in that population was very just mind blowing for me, you know. I've actually spoke with the individual, she was doing my hair at the time, and she was very disrespectful towards the population to a point that she was just, the stuff she was saying was bothering me, you know. But then come to find out, she had her own personal feelings about it because what she experienced, come to find out, her 3 children, who's by the same person, was actually undercover LGBT, part of the LGBT community. So that caused her to speak angrily about the population as a whole. But my thing is still, with that being said, she was saying that she didn't believe how many of them were getting killed and stuff, that it was made up in media. But statistics are actually numbers that we build certain organizations and people receive grants off of. So that information is collected, you know, with, you know, no biases and things. It's accurate information. And I told her that they actually do, you know, and everything. I mean, I still feel we was able to share our differences in a way that we weren't in there, you know, like fighting, but she definitely was on the opposition of the population. But yes, definitely just, you know, for someone to just be so angry against someone who was living their life to the fullest or trying to, it's just sad to me, you know, and it hurts me, you know, even not being part of the population, but working for an agency. I don't have any biases against that. You know, I don't feel that I.
I think you got muted yourself, Lakeisha, but I appreciate what you were saying and some good points.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the trans community, it's startling, the statistics. And that's
Was I muted the whole time?
Yes, yeah. Do you want to take a moment and recap what you were saying?
Yes, a call tried to come through. Was I muted the whole time?
Not the whole time.
Okay. A call just tried to come through. And I seen the mute. I'm like, I did all that talking and they didn't hear anything. I don't know where it actually cut off, but I was just trying to bring interest to that, the statistics and how people are unaware and like to just, you know, dismiss it. But those are facts, and it's sad, you know. This really is.
It is, yeah. And I appreciate you bringing it up because the statistics are really startling surrounding the trans community. And that's why awareness and education is so important.
Yeah. I'd like to also just read a couple of these from the chat. Sorry if I don't, get through all of them. I might miss a few, but let's see. Someone mentions that how much strength it takes to ask for help only to get placed and with an agency that's using their dead name. And yeah. The invalidating of being insulted, turned away. Let's see. Okay, more trainings for staff. Continually assessing the agency's policies and approaches toward LGBTQ+ community. Talking about intersectionality. Make sure all parts of the person feel safe in the space. Okay.
I like to be more consistent in offering my pronouns and asking them from others. I think that that's so important. I just saw a commercial, maybe some of you saw it, and it was an interview commercial, and the interviewer led with giving their pronouns and then asked for the interviewee's preferred pronouns. And it was like a sigh of relief washed over the interviewee. And we've all been an interviewee before. And so I think that just having that moment where the interviewer asked and said, well, here are my pronouns, what are yours? I think that that's so, so important.
Okay, connecting with the resource, the LGBTQ+ resource center on campus. That's cool. You'll have to send me that, Tasha.
I definitely will. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This is really great. This makes me so excited for the future. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's see. So, before we move on to questions, I am very quickly going to just go over a few events that VAVP is hosting in the near future. So if anyone you know or you would like to attend, please come out. So first we have the QTPOC Survivor Support Group. This exists specifically as a safe space for queer and transgender people of color. It's on Zoom, so anyone in Virginia can come. Next, we have the LGBTQIA+ Survivor Support Group, which has a different topic focus each time. Right now, we've been talking about how the pandemic has been affecting us. As far as one-time upcoming events, June 27th, we'll be having a block party with our partner, Nations Foundation, for National HIV Testing Day in Richmond, Virginia. And on June 28th, we will have a community wellness check-in hosted on Zoom. So, yeah. All right. Let's see. We're going to skip that. But okay, Tasha.
So we'd like to open it up for any final questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I work at my college's mental health and wellness office and maintain our social media. And I'm always trying to share what's going on in the community in terms of service provisions. And I know that Catherine does rattle those off really quickly, but if you could share your graphics and the events that you have coming up, I would love to put that on our social media.
Okay, for sure. Yeah. I don't know if you can screenshot right now, but also
yeah, I got the first one, but I wasn't fast enough for the other ones.
Okay, let me. This one.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also think the PowerPoint will be set. Yes, Michelle's going to send out the PowerPoint too, I believe. So yeah.
And we are at Virginia AVP. If you guys need to find us on social media, we have all of our events there. Kat and I will be in the hot sun several times this summer, so we hope to see some faces. Someone else out there joining us sweating. And so yeah, we have lots of things going on, and we look forward to sharing and receiving anyone.
It is Pride Month, so our agency, LGBT Life Center, also has some events on our website that you all can view if you want to get out and enjoy those events. One of the biggest ones that I do want to let you know about is the cookout on the 25th. It's going to be in Norfolk at Lakewood. Free food and everything, an event from 4 to 8. And we have a kickball tournament the next day, which is a Saturday. that will be participating. Our team is called Life's a Pitch, with a P, of course, okay? And, you know, definitely come out and support us.
What
Thank
day
you for
was
that.
that?
The cookout is the 25th and the tournament is the 26th. And the actual location is on the website as well as on Facebook and everything.
What was the website? What was the name of the organization or the website?
Oh, LGBTLifecenter.org.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Lakeisha. Even though we're taking questions, I'm gonna put it on the next slide just because in case anyone wants to see our email, website, or newsletter up here. Also, I'm very comfortable with silence, so I'll just sit here smiling for like a minute. And if like anyone wants to, oh, I do see there's actually some message in the chat. Let's see, actually.
So there's a question in the chat, Catherine. Does anybody else feel like the plus marginalizes the whole segment of the population?
That's such a good question. That is such a good question. I don't even feel like, yeah, Tasha, go ahead.
I'm not a part of the plus, and so it's probably not okay for me to, you know, give an opinion on that. But I think that there's a lot of identities that is being wrapped up in LGBTQ period. And so it is kind of a summary of a vast array of experiences. And so it is really important to grow more comfortable with all of these terms and to really educate everyone and yourselves on all of these terms. And so that way there's no othering, there's no plus, it's this is what this is what I am, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good answer. I will say multiple of my, well, almost all of them except for queer, my identities are part of the plus. And Kendra, you've really given me something to think about. I'm gonna have to sit with that for a while. I think you make a really good point, honestly. And I think as, you know, if I were to like fast forward in 100 years, like, will we be using different language? I hope so. I hope we'll be using different language for everything. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point. And I will have to sit with myself with that. Thank you, Catherine.
And we had Michelle raise her hand in the chat box.
Okay, thank you. I'm so bad at seeing that.
Thanks. I was just wondering, when I first saw your line about referral agencies that need to be respectful and affirming, I thought you were saying don't only use referrals for agencies like that. And I was wondering how to approach that. Then it sounded like you were saying maybe just if you have an LGBTQ client, for their sake, make sure that referral is has those qualities. But it made me think we should consider that in all our allies and referrals. And so I was trying to think how to do that. And you know, we can't have a litmus test or anything, but maybe I'm thinking there's all these new laws that we've just passed in Virginia. So maybe a way to start the conversation is, have you heard about all these new initiatives and the, you know, that now you can't use someone's identity as a defense if you had, you know, for example, you felt threatened by a trans person and were attracted to them and that kind of thing. So maybe that's the way to do it, is start that conversation with on those laws. I don't know, what ideas do you have for us?
I don't know. I will say I don't know much about the laws right now, so I can't really speak to that. But I do know like what we kind of do when we're doing things like vetting agencies. Personally, I try to be pretty direct a lot of the time and just like be like, hey, do you serve LGBTQ plus people? Do you serve transgender people? Do you like, and be like, usually I'll be talking about a specific client too, and I'll just be like, okay, what is your experience with that? And just kind of gauge, because a lot of people will say like, you know, they're like, yeah, we do. But I'm like, okay, can you tell me about like you know, how many people do you serve, or like, what qualifies you to do that, you know? And other times I'll do things like, if I call a hotline, I will talk about a client that I have using like they pronouns, for example, and just see if they respond using they pronouns, which honestly, most of the time they don't.
Oh, wow.
And just like take note of that. I did that the other day, and I called someone and they responded using she pronouns when I had talked about my client for like 10 minutes using their pronouns, you know? So, you know, just like little things like that really are some of the things that we do. But also, you know, nothing beats like, you know, a face-to-face or a Zoom call being like, you know, what do you guys do? Like, what's your outreach look like and stuff like that?
Yeah, it is really just about asking, and it's continual work. Sometimes you have to keep asking, and you have to keep showing up at organizations and facilities and saying, is this an area that you have? Is this something you're comfortable with? What's the language you use, like Kat was saying? And just remaining persistent, because a big barrier to, you know, seeking out services is the fear that your marginalized identities won't be acknowledged and won't be recognized. And so by service providers doing the legwork and asking the hard questions, that's a really big part of that.
One more thing that I want to add to is, I was just thinking about it when Tasha mentioned continuous. People have staff turnovers pretty often, and they're like, it's something to note that like you may have had an agency that was like so awesome, so good, and then their LGBTQ plus liaison like left, you know, and they have no capacity for that anymore. So that's just something to note too, is like, we try to like call people like once in a while and just be like, what's good? But because you don't know like who's not there anymore and stuff like that, you know. So that's something to take into account too, that unfortunately it does have to be something that's like always being done over and over again. You can't just like check a box on an agency permanently. But, yeah.
Yeah, and then making sure that they're comfortable with everyone. And so some places say that they're for gay people. And so I have called before and said, are you open to bisexual women? Are you open to transgender women? And have these types of conversations. And so making sure that that comfort, that it extends to everyone.
And if I could add to that, I think being direct and having those conversations opens doors also, and like gets them to, even if they're not serving the community or doing what they need to be doing to serve the community, it plants those seeds for them to start thinking about ways that they can. And if multiple people are asking them like, okay, this is a need, we should probably meet this need. So just kind of making them aware that it's there, and being direct is kind of honestly our role as advocates.
And if you hear from a client that they weren't treated well somewhere, probably it's better to deal with it as a general issue than to say, so-and-so told me that they didn't get this, or that you use dead names or whatever. You know, it's not to put that client at risk.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I appreciate what you said, Michelle, and also Rebecca, because Tasha and I are actually on a call yesterday with an awesome agency, and just talking about like some of like talking about the things we're talking about right now. And they were like, wow, we have some gaps. We have some gaps and we need to do that. So it's exactly what you're saying. Like once you have that very direct conversation, like a lot of times people are very willing, you know, and that's why everyone's here today too. Like we want to do better, you know, we want to serve everyone, you know, so like, yeah.
So one of my spouse's favorite sayings is, you don't know what you don't know. And so really asking, really doing that legwork and really surrounding the community and saying, hey, is this a service you provide? Is this a group that you acknowledge? How can we help over here? What about these people? That's really important. Any more questions?
Just wanted to say thank you for letting me chime in from across the country.
Thank you so much for coming.
have to go put some fires out, so I'll see everybody later. Thanks.
Thank you.
So if nobody has any other questions, we want to thank Catherine and Tasha for coming today and giving us so much good information. The recording and the PowerPoint slides will be sent to everybody either this afternoon or tomorrow, but definitely by the end of this week. If you can please take a minute or two to complete our survey. Michelle Mueller just shared it in the chat box. I'll share it one more time. It's really easy evaluation, and it won't take more than maybe 3 minutes. But Catherine, Tasha, thank you so much again for all of this information. We really appreciate it. And I think I can speak for everybody that we all came out of this training with a lot to think about and actions that we can take moving forward. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. Remember, this is the June training, and we will have another one in July up to November, I believe. I will send the flyer out as well with the PowerPoint and the recording. But thank you all. Hope you guys have a great afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.